Welcome to 9works TV. Now here at Porsche, the company is celebrating 50 years of the iconic 911 Turbo. And from 1974, at the start of production, up to the 992, Porsche produced 87,520 examples of Turbo. But some are more special than others, 3 of which are behind me here. All early examples of the iconic 930 with a key link to the Porsche family. Let's take a look in closer detail. As I said at the top of the video, 87,520 911 turbos produced from 74 up to the start of 992 production. It basically means that around 1 in 10 911s produced is a 911 Turbo. Now, the 911 Turbo was first shown and debuted to the public at the Frankfurt International Motor Show in 1973. It'd be just over a year later before production versions started appearing, but before the production version, there was this, really what is now known at Porsche as Turbo number 1. It's a very, very important piece of Porsche history. You may spot a lot of detailed changes on this car in comparison to other 930s or 911 turbos made from the G-Series platform from 1974 up to 1989. And the reason is, although this was the first customer car, it was technically still a prototype. The reason a prototype was given to the customer is, well, this customer was very special and very important to the Porsche brand and family.
That person was none other than Louise Piëch, daughter of Ferdinand Porsche and sister to Ferry, who helped set up the Porsche company and played a key role in its development for decades. Louise, known as the First Lady of the Porsche and Piëch families, is arguably the most prominent female in the history of Porsche as a company.
The car was presented to Louise Piëch on the occasion of her 70th birthday. That was on the 29th of August 1974, a couple of months short of when the production 930 debuted. Now, there were plenty of features on this car that did make it to 930 production. For example, the headlight washers with the snorkel profile, the electric side mirror, the iconic 5-leaf Fuchs wheels, and the whale tail on the back of the car as well. There are plenty of features that are unique to this car as a prototype. For example, if you look down the side, you'll see that this car hasn't yet taken on what would become the wide body with that muscular wheel arch profile of the 930. Louise Piëch's car was based on a 2.7 Carrera of the 1974 model year, which means it is narrow body. And if you look at the back on that rear arch, it carries that delicate arch profile of the 2.7 Carrera. Elsewhere as well, on the deck lid, underneath the whale tail, you'll notice not the Turbo script, but Carrera, because, as I said, this was a body from the 2.7 Carrera. The hue of the car is silver. It has got a very special tartan pattern running down the side with the Porsche script. We're going to talk more about that when we look inside the car. But first, let's take a look at the flat six out back that's powering this thing. Just want to take a look under the deck lid of this special 911 because many of you will know that the first 911 Turbo was actually 3-litre capacity, developing 260 horsepower. But this car was slightly different. It was a prototype, don't forget. It therefore had a development engine inside it, which was 2.7 litre. It was actually a version of the 2.7 litre Carrera engine, albeit turbocharged, that found its way into the back of this prototype car. That isn't the engine that sits in here today. It has since been replaced or upgraded, I guess, with a production version of the 3-litre turbocharged, single turbocharged flat six. Without the intercooler. That arrived in 1978 when the 930 increased its displacement up to 3.3 litres. But the first customer 911 Turbo was fitted with a 2.7 litre flat six, and not many people know that. Right, amazing. What an honour it is sitting in here. Louise Piëch, after taking delivery of this car, presented to her by her brother, the legendary and late Ferry Porsche. Louise took this back to her home in Gmünd, Austria, hence the A badge on the deck lid. It's got 32,000 kilometres on the clock. Lots of recognisable 930 DNA, I guess, but again, like lots of changes that deviate from that as a prototype. The shift lever itself says 4 gears. It's actually 5-speed, this prototype was. As you'll know, for production cars, the 930 didn't get a 5-speed until the very last year of 930 production in 1989. Let's talk about the interior because it's very unique. When the production 930 was launched, there were actually 3 versions of tartan available. You had this one, which was called McLaughlin pattern, which is kind of sitting in the centre of what's described as a brick red leather lining. Alongside McLaughlin, you had a black watch tartan, and that came around because the designer at the time, or head of design, the later legendary Tony Lepine, came into work one day wearing a pair of black watch tartan trousers. The third tartan pattern that was available for the 930 Turbo, only for that 1975 model year, was Mackenzie. So there were your 3 tartan patterns. It's worth pointing out that for the first couple of years, tartan patterns were exclusive to the 911 Turbo, the 930. It wasn't until the 1976 model year where Porsche released tartan patterns to the rest of the 911 production line. As you know, turbos, they don't rev as high as a naturally aspirated car. However, the tacho in this says 10,000 RPM. Why does it have that heady 10,000 RPM tacho? Well, it was in homage to the 2.1 Carrera RSR turbo that scored a 2nd overall placing at Le Mans only a couple of months prior in June of 1974. Elsewhere, you've got this weird Blaupunkt system with a microphone, presumably so you can record 9works radio on the go while driving, although probably not. It's also got a very special plaque in front of the passenger seat over the glove box that says LP, Louise Piëch, Turbo, Porsche number 1, Stuttgart Zuffenhausen, 29th of August, 1974. That is quite literally 50 years ago, so very special and a real honour to take my place at the seat, quite literally, of Porsche history. But there will be other members of the Piëch and Porsche families that would get a 911 Turbo, and one would be a very fast company car. Let's take a look.
First though, here's what the early production 911 Turbo looked like.
So it wasn't until October 1974 that the production 911 Turbo made its debut. It was at the Paris Motor Show. The numbers associated with this car were stratospheric. 5.5 seconds to 100 kilometers an hour, a top speed of 154 mile an hour. All of the power, and this car in production form raised 260 horsepower. That was all achieved mechanically. There's no computer chips and fine tuning. We're way away from that. So 50 years ago, as I said, this was the car that elevated Porsche's 911 into supercar status. Here we have a production example in front of us. It's a French market car. It's actually one of the first 30 911 production turbos ever created. So it's a grand old machine, very nearly a half a century old, finished in ice cream metallic. It's had a non-electric wing mirror added to it from the Carrera range of the time. Otherwise, it's pretty much standard spec. And as I said, on the Turbo, really, and certainly in the 930 generation, there weren't a lot of options. There was so much spec thrown on as standard. You'll notice, for example, and this is in difference to the Porsche number 1 Turbo, Louise Piëch's car from earlier, this car is now sporting the fog lights, which was standard specification. We have also got, looking down the side of the car, that big wide body now with these iconic steel arches with the thick, aggressive turbo stance and profile to them. The whale tail remained, of course. We've also now got a rear wiper, again standard specification. We've also got the Fuchs wheels as well. Now 15-inch was the diameter for these cars, 7-inch wide at the front, 8-inch wide at the back. Wider wheels and tyres were needed, particularly at the back, to keep this thing gripped to the road. What I will say as well, more standard spec on the car, heated front and rear screens, firmer suspension, thicker anti-roll bars, wider stance, as you can see, radio as standard. That was just the outside. If we look inside, sports seats by Recaro. They did change in profile for the 930 in the mid-80s, but these were optioned in as extra. Otherwise, everything you see here is standard spec. The video clock, obviously gone, is the 10,000 RPM tacho in now at just under 7 grand here. So that's it really. Ice cream metallic that this one is a beautiful period colour from the early 70s. And in the 50 years since it was made, this car has been well used with 143,000 kilometres on the clock. This really was the start of the road-going, turbocharged 911 lineage. How about this? This beautiful oak green metallic car belonged to none other than Ferry Porsche, the founder of the Porsche sports car company. This particular car was given to Ferry on the 19th of September 1976. It was actually the occasion of Ferry's 67th birthday. It was registered for the road 4 days later, again as a 77 model year car, with a few cool extra bits and pieces on it, clearly, as you can see. Oak green metallic paintwork, for example, with matching centre coloured Fuchs wheels. It's worth pointing out a lot of the cars given to the Porsche family were in green, various stages of green. Again, I've mentioned in a previous video, that's why I had my car painted Irish green in homage to that. Ferry Porsche clearly liked oak green metallic, as here. He famously had a 2.7 Carrera beforehand that was oak green metallic with a tartan interior. There's a similar vibe going on here, as you're about to see. As a 77 model year, there is a slight variation to the design of the whale tail Outback. Ferry also optioned to have that turbo badge removed from the back, although it's pretty obvious as to what this car is. However, I think the most special part of its specification is definitely inside, so let's jump in and have a look. I have to say, in fact I say it all the time, don't I, it's always the greatest privilege doing this job, because right now I am acutely aware that I am sitting at the wheel of not just an iconic sports car in the 911 Turbo, but the car that belonged to the founder of Porsche. This was the place where Ferry Porsche sat on his commute to work every morning. What a place to be. With this being a 77 model year now, there are some detailed changes to the cabin. For example, we've now got vents in the centre of the dashboard. There is now a boost gauge at the bottom of the central mounted tachometer. That now goes up to 1.5 bar of boost. But they're only minor details in a cabin that, as you can tell, is very unique. We'll start with the green leather first of all, which particularly on the seats, very soft, very smooth to touch. It's actually buffalo hide. We've then got this famous green tartan in the seat centres and the door cards. Now, the story goes that Ferry Porsche actually covered over 8,000 kilometres in this car in the first year. Definitely driven, not hidden. Ferry then gave it back to Porsche. It was then about to be sold to a customer, but the late Harold Wagner, who was head of customer relations and PR at Porsche at the time, decided, along with some colleagues, that this should stay within the Porsche Museum and factory collection, which is the reason you and I are now kind of sitting in this car today. Other options on this car, we've got impact absorbing shocks for the bumpers, MO58, M261 passenger side airbag, M351 radio with traffic broadcasts, M422 Blaupunkt stereo cassette, M430 fog lights in yellow, M498 turbo badge delete, as I mentioned, M559 air conditioning, and M650 electric sunroof. We've also got the body colour painted Fuchs centres, one-off green leather interior and special full tartan interior. Amazing colour combination. What an inspiration for anybody else that dares to spec a car like this in the modern day, maybe through Porsche exclusive manufacture, of course, but a real unique colour combination, really inspired. It's a beautiful place to be. And as I said, I can only imagine what it would have been like travelling to work at Zuffenhausen every day in this awesome version of the 930. It's got 17,500 kilometres on the clock today, so still baby miles really, but as I said, an amazing piece of Porsche history as an example of the early 911 Turbo owned by company founder Ferry Porsche. An amazing place to be and a real privilege. So there we have it then. That is the story of these three unique 930s that started that turbo legacy, a car that sat right at the top of the 911 tree in terms of power, performance, style and luxury. Thank you so much to the PR team here at the Porsche Museum for allowing us to get up close to Porsche history as we celebrate 50 years of the iconic 911 Turbo. We'll see you again soon on 9works TV.